Blood never belongs on a fence post. Not out here, where the land wakes slow and quiet and a man can spend half his life trying to forget the world that once broke him. Yet that morning, Caleb Thorne reined in his horse so sharply the old mare snorted in protest. There, beneath the rising sun, a streak of dark red clung to the wood. Dried at the edges. Fresh enough to mean trouble. The world around him held its breath, wind brushing through sagebrush, a lonely crow calling somewhere distant, the saddle leather creaking under his weight. Caleb, 52 and carved by years of hard sun and harder silence, stared at the blood like it had no right to exist. 12 years living alone on this patch of Wyoming dirt had turned him into a man who liked his routine simple and his company non-existent. But trouble didn't ask permission before stepping onto a man's land. He slid off his horse, boots landing with a dull thud that stirred the dust. A thin trail of red led away from the fence toward the far stretch of his field, a place few crossed unless they were lost, desperate, or running from something deadly. Caleb followed the trail, rifle slung loose in his hand. Each step kicked up tiny clouds of dust that drifted behind him like faint ghosts. Then he saw her. A young woman lay crumpled beside the fence line, half hidden by tall grass. Her dress was torn to ribbons, her face streaked with dirt, and her breathing came in shallow, uneven pulls. One hand pressed hard against her side where blood had soaked through the fabric. The other hand dragged weakly across the ground, as if she had been crawling even after her strength was gone. Caleb approached the way a man approaches a wounded animal, slow, careful, knowing fear can bite as hard as desperation. Her eyelids fluttered. When they finally opened, he saw green eyes clouded by pain and dust. Eyes that flicked across the land with the sharp instinct of someone who had been hunted. He knelt beside her. His shadow fell over her and she flinched like shadows meant danger. When she tried to speak, her breath cracked. The second breath carried a whisper, thin, trembling, but unmistakably real. "Please, don't take me back." The words hit Caleb in the place he had long believed had turned to stone. He'd heard lies, excuses, desperations dressed up as truth. This wasn't any of those. This was terror wearing a human voice. Caleb scanned the distant hills. Fear like this never traveled alone. Somewhere out there were riders, men who followed blood until the trail ended. He looked back at her trembling fingers, her dirt-streaked skin, her stubborn determination to drag herself this far. He didn't need to know her name to understand one thing clearly. Some dangers you see coming. Some you hear. And some arrive as strangers bleeding on your doorstep. With careful arms, Caleb lifted the woman. She was lighter than he expected. The kind of light that spoke of too many nights without food and too many days running for her life. Her breath brushed faintly against his shirt as he carried her toward the cabin that had kept him company for 12 long years. Inside, he set her gently on the narrow cot near the window. The cabin smelled of dry wood, old tobacco, and the faint trace of coffee left on the stove since dawn. It smelled of a quiet life, one that was now cracking open around him. Caleb fetched a basin, tore a strip from a clean cloth, and uncorked a bottle of whiskey meant for cold nights and memories that hurt too deep to recall sober. He cleaned the dirt from her wound, watching her jaw clench tight with pain. She didn't cry out. That alone told him more about her than words could. When her eyes opened again, they were clearer, though rimmed with exhaustion. She stared at him, studying him, judging whether he was salvation or danger wrapped in calm silence. After a long while, she whispered, voice thin as worn thread. "Thank you." Caleb dipped the cloth again. "You ran a long way," he said quietly. "Someone chasing you?" The question hung in the air like dust in a sunbeam. She hesitated. Then nodded. "They'll follow until they finish what they started." Caleb leaned back on the stool. He had seen that kind of fear before, years ago, when men with guns answered only to greed. He recognized the look in her eyes, someone who had watched death coming and refused to stop running. "What did they start?" he asked. Her lips trembled before she answered. My name is Lena Carter. My family had a small claim near Silver Mesa. We found a vein of ore, richer than anything we'd ever hoped for. She swallowed, wincing at the memory. Word spread too fast. Caleb's jaw tightened. Trouble always traveled on loose tongues. A man named Cole Maddox heard. Foreman at the mining camp. He sent men one night, they said they only wanted to talk. Her expression hardened painfully. But men like that don't come to talk. Her voice cracked. She pulled the blanket closer around her trembling shoulders. They took our claim. They took everything. I only escaped because they thought I was dead. Caleb didn't move. His silence was the heavy kind, the kind shaped by years of burying things he didn't want to remember. Outside, a crow cawed from the fence line, and the land seemed to hold its breath. If she was telling the truth, Caleb thought, then trouble is already closer than I want to believe. He stood and moved to the window. The land stretched wide and still, but the quiet carried an uneasy weight. Lena watched him anxiously. You think they found my trail? She whispered. Caleb didn't sugarcoat truth. If they want you as bad as you say, they'll follow dust itself. He crossed the room, pulled the old rug aside, and lifted the trapdoor beneath it, unused for years. The darkness below smelled of earth and memories long buried. You'll be safe down there, he said. Long enough for me to know what's coming. She hesitated, fear trembling through her fingers. You can't face them alone. I've been alone a long time, Caleb said simply. Long enough to know what I can handle. With a shaky breath, Lena climbed down, and Caleb lowered the hatch. He replaced the rug, then stood perfectly still. That's when he heard it. Hoofbeats. Faint. Steady. Coming fast. Caleb stepped to the window. 4 riders crested the ridge, moving with purpose. Hired guns. Finishers of dirty work. They slowed near the fence line. One rider dismounted, crouching low to examine the ground. Caleb knew exactly what he was searching for: blood, tracks, any sign of a wounded woman. The man pointed toward the cabin. Caleb stepped out onto the porch, rifle loose but ready. The lead rider called out, "We're hunting a thief. A liar. A trespasser. She ran through here." "You won't find what you're after," Caleb said calmly. "This land doesn't get visitors." The riders shared looks, the kind exchanged when men are about to do something foolish and violent. "We'll search your barn and shed," the lead man said. "Won't take long." Caleb gave a slow nod. Free land means free choices. You can make yours. Just think twice before stepping where you're not welcome. 2 riders headed toward the barn. The third knelt near the fence, touching the dirt. His movements were slow, practiced, someone who read the earth like scripture. He raised his hand. Fresh tracks. Small. Light. Not Caleb's. The lead rider smirked. "Seems you've got company." Before Caleb could answer, a sharp creak sounded from inside the cabin. A single floorboard. The lead rider heard it too. His hand went to his gun. Caleb moved first. His rifle roared, sending the lead man crashing backward into the dust. Gunfire exploded across the yard. Bullets tore through porch wood, splinters flying. Caleb dove, fired, shifted position, fired again, counting their shots, their positions, their mistakes. He had not wanted this fight, but fights don't wait for permission. With the men pinned down, he sprinted to the barn, breath burning in his chest. Inside he found old mining supplies, relics from a past he never revisited. He grabbed a single stick of explosive he'd kept for years, just in case. He lit the fuse, whispered a prayer, and rolled it toward the trough where 2 riders hid. The explosion shattered the quiet and the trough, and 2 riders with it. The third man fled at the sight, spurring his horse into a desperate gallop. Silence settled like dust after a storm. Caleb walked back to the cabin. Lena pushed open the door, pale but alive. "Is it done?" "For now," Caleb answered. "But truth doesn't stay buried." He saddled his horse. "Where are you going?" she asked, fear rising again. "To the nearest town. Someone has to speak for your family. If they know I'm alive." "They already know," Caleb said gently. "The difference now is whether they come as shadows, or as men." Days later, county officials rode in. Lena told her story. This time, the law listened. In the evenings, Caleb repaired his fence while Lena sat on the porch, the sun warming her healing face. The quiet felt different now, no longer empty, no longer a punishment. Caleb Thorne had spent 12 years hiding from the world. One wounded stranger reminded him of something he had forgotten. A man isn't meant to carry his past like a chain. Sometimes he has to break it. Sometimes he has to stand up again. Sometimes the hardest road is the one that leads home. And if this story stayed with you even a little, give it a like, it helps more than you think. If you want more journeys across the Old West, subscribe and ride along for the next tale.